So John, you and I know each other pretty well, but I've got a feeling that most of our viewers don't know you as well as I do. So tell us a little bit about yourself. What is your background? Where did you grow up? What got you into music? And what made you want to be a conductor?
So I grew up in the Atlanta area and started music lessons when I was young. My parents put me in music lessons because I didn't live in a neighborhood with other kids, and so they needed to socialize me on the weekend. So I was in piano and violin at 4, and did that all through school, thinking that I would probably do something different in college. But somewhere around my sophomore year in high school, my orchestra teacher was injured from carpal tunnel, and she was there, but she needed someone to conduct the orchestra that day during class. And from that point on, it's sort of been, that was the path that I sort of diverted back onto from that point on. And so I entered college knowing that I wanted to pursue conducting, and then have been doing that ever since.
So let me ask about that moment. In that case, were you just the kid who raised his hand at that moment, or did she say, Conklin, here's the baton?
A little bit of both. She sort of said before class, like, is this something that you'd want to do? There was the pressure. We had a concert in a week, and we needed the rehearsal time. And by the nature, at that time I was playing violin. By the nature of it, that was just sort of a natural position to fall in, and that all the stars sort of just aligned in that moment, if you will.
And up until that point, had conducting been something that was on your mind as maybe that would be fun, or was you just got on the podium and went, oh, this is it. This is what I wanted to do all along?
Yeah, I think it's the latter. I never really considered being a conductor. It was something that was a little foreign to me. I had it in youth orchestra. Of course, I had it in an orchestra class. But what happened was that it just sort of worked from the beginning. So then I just began thinking about it a little bit more, and then took some lessons with the assistant conductor in Atlanta, just to figure out, what does this person actually do? Because the person doesn't make any sound, and yet there seems to be some type of coordination, collaboration happening. And he helped me sort of figure out that, it's more about score study and interpersonal relationships, and then there's parts of this that matter, but it's sort of putting it all together. And so then I went to school, had the same conversation with the orchestra teacher there, the director of the orchestras there, and he told me that he wasn't going to teach me until I learned theory and music history and ear training and got proficient on my instrument. And so he didn't take me until I was halfway through my junior year of college, and from that point on, I sort of have pursued it ever since.
So what happens in a conducting lesson? I mean, most of us, or many of us at least, have had a little bit of experience in piano lessons or voice lessons or something where the teacher says, do it like this, and you do it like that. So what do you do in a conducting lesson?
Yeah, that's $1 million question. And I think a lot of questions that conductors ask, teachers of conductors, and then people who want to be conductors. So there's several elements of being a conductor. There is the actual emotions, right? So that is an important part of it. That part is kind of the easy part. The part that I found sustains careers is fortunately what I was sort of indoctrinated with when I first started. So the first question was, we did Beethoven 5. And I come in there ready to sort of wave my arms, sing a little bit maybe to keep it moving. But the first thing out of his mouth was, what do the first 5 bars mean? And so we think of it as 4 bars, and ba 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 ba, but it's actually 5 bars. There's an extra bar there. And he basically explained to me, the role of a conductor is to know that that's 5 bars and to have an answer why that thing is 5 bars instead of 4, because that's important for the composer. And your job up there is to be the composer's advocate. And if Beethoven read 5 bars for that, then there has to be some type of musical reason. And then, therefore, your job is to pass that information on to the orchestra, because then it has to get to the audience somehow. And so that's an evolving answer that I have for that question, but it's something that you sort of take and apply to other pieces. So why is this thing this way instead of a different way? Why does Mahler start with an A instead of a D? When the piece is in D major, he starts on A. And then it affects the way that we hear the piece internally, and then affects the way that we sort of bring it about during the concert.
So is it then safe to say that that is the part of conducting that gets you personally excited?
Yeah, I'm sort of strange in that I like opening the score and figuring out what it sounds like in my head, and then finding out what questions the composer is asking. I mean, you'll find that, I find at least, that a lot of composers over the course of their repertoire end up asking the same question over and over again, but just approaching it from different ways, which is kind of an interesting, you sort of see them evolve over the course of time, which is, it's fun. It's fun for me. And then the second part that I really enjoy is then collaborating with an orchestra, because no matter how much you prepare in front of the score by yourself, sort of playing through it or hearing it in your head, somebody else will inevitably have a different way of hearing, a different way of looking at it, and bring an entirely new perspective. And so the magic is when you put those two things together, usually you can get 1 + 1 = 3, as opposed to, it's my way or your way kind of thing, which is the beauty of, live collaboration, which is why I love working with orchestras.
So you went off to graduate school at Yale, I know, and then from there you lived in places like Cleveland and Vermont. You found yourself back here in the Southeast, and have gotten involved with an organization called the Atlanta Music Project. So tell us a little bit about that group and about your relationship with it.
Sure. So Atlanta Music Project is one of the things I'm most proud of. The mantra down there is music for social change. And so there are two goals for this organization. The first is to provide an excellent musical experience for all students, but specifically for students that wouldn't normally have that type of environment at their fingertips. So that part of it has always been important to me. The second part is the social change part. So the Atlanta Music Project is based on the El Sistema system, which is a system that was started in Venezuela. And it truly was a social impact program. The government there decided that every student needed structured out-of-school time activities. And what they did was they put an instrument into the hands of every student, gave them music lessons, eventually formed ensembles, and an entire generation is not only musically trained, if you will, but they were able to turn around a lot of their social issues at that time. One of the products out of that system was Gustav, who then became the music director of LA Phil. Mm-hmm. And with him, he brought the El System program, which is then replicated in the United States in different cities. And so I was fortunate that a friend of mine from graduate school decided that he wanted to be a part of that program, and he started in Atlanta the year after I left, actually, and had started basically with nothing, with an idea, and an office. The Atlanta Symphony gave him an office, and he started walking the neighborhood, talking to parents, talking about the programming, and to this day, now they have a center that they've built in the neighborhood. Every day there are kids in and out of that place, either taking lessons, performing, working, practicing, collaborating with one another, and it's a citywide program now that I've been fortunate to be a part of for the past 4 years, and they're doing really, really exciting things that not only are providing musical experiences, but also getting to that social impact that's also really important to me.
So this is not just a youth orchestra kind of thing, the way already exists in a lot of those Atlanta suburbs in particular, but something that provides an after-school experience and provides structure and provides a sort of organizational system and discipline for kids who otherwise might not necessarily have it, right?
Yeah, I think it provides the pathway of opportunity, right? So all the students have opportunities, but this is sort of another one that they wouldn't naturally have access to in the Atlanta area. So most of the organizations are very focused on translating kids into conservatory or translating kids into music school. And the goal of this organization is really to provide structure, to provide musical education, but also to surround them with other resources. So not only do they have after school ensembles, But they also have a guidance counselor, career counselor that helps them get to different colleges and make sure they're, have taken their ACT, SAT, are applying to college, making sure they have access to the scholarships that are available to them. And they even have worked out with Clayton State a pathway that if they go into music, they have they're tuition free at Clayton State if they come from the Atlanta Music Project. And so we're building structures around the neighborhood that didn't necessarily exist there before, perhaps. But adding to it a musical environment. And so that's sort of the conduit for it, if you will.
So this is then a music group and musicians who are working within the community in a way that is really deeply and personally involved. And tell us a little bit about, does that kind of reflect itself in the way that you view the role of a conductor in a community and the role of an orchestra in a community?
Yeah, it does. The conductors sort of are associated with, tuxedos and sort of nice things and sort of being in charge. And that's one element of it. That's sort of the White Tower element if you get to the upper echelon, right, of the field. But truthfully, it has been a lesson in people skills and leadership. Inevitably, it's truly the same as working at Atlanta Music Project is in some ways the same as working at the New York Philharmonic, in that it's people. We want to put on a good show. People need to be happy in order to do their best. And from a leadership position, your job is to provide support and empathy and be very clear about what the goals are, either for yourself or for the organization or for the ensemble as it is, and then go about helping people get to those goals. And it has helped me keep in touch with why I chose music to begin with. It's supposed to be fun. It's supposed to be enjoyable, not only for you and for the orchestra, but for the audience. And sometimes it can get kind of abstract if you just, are only performing at a certain level or only performing certain repertoire. It can begin getting into an echo chamber. And so this has been a real humanizing experience, and I think it's been helpful to sustain enthusiasm for the field where that can get tough sometimes, right? In the middle of a season, especially during the pandemic, maybe I should have done something else. But every time I go down there, I become refreshed with the potential of what we can do together.
And it's a reminder, I would suspect, of what an orchestra like the Spartanburg Philharmonic has the potential to do within its community. And often does, and sometimes does, in the ways that it's got the potential to reach out and pull in more people and bind the community together more closely than it already is, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there is definitely something there. So I can say that when we put on concerts in Atlanta, they're always sold out. There's always an enthusiasm. It doesn't matter what we play. We do play a breadth of repertoire. So there is the Beethoven symphonies, but there's also, we'll do an arrangement right after a Beethoven symphony we did Alicia Keys at the last concert. We did some Samuel Coleridge Taylor, which we're doing in Spartanburg here in a couple days. And it's more about the experience of being together and supporting what's going on, the live art. And I think there's a lot to be said about if you can get people engaged and have them see themselves in the orchestra or see themselves in the repertoire that's being performed, the concert experience is completely different at that point. Everyone's sort of a participant. If we just sort of come in and expect the audience to come in and just watch, and it's sort of be a museum and the orchestra members are sort of like a zoo, they're on stage, that's a disconnect. And we're already sort of disconnected in the world as it is. I think the concert hall is a place that if we provide everybody an opportunity to take part in the experience of it, then this is something that you can't recreate on the couch watching Netflix or listening to a podcast in your car. It's something you have to come to the concert hall to actually experience. I think Spartanburg's close. There's a lot of exciting things happening here. It's what attracts me to the city and to the job. And I think there's a lot of parallels, like you mentioned.
So let's talk now a little bit about this program that's coming up. So you've got the huge Mahler Symphony on the one hand, and then you had to ask yourself what is going to be an appropriate pairing with this huge Mahler Symphony. So how about if we talk first for a moment about what you chose?
Sure. So knowing that we had this big symphony on the program, it's not dissimilar from if you are going to a really nice restaurant and you know that you're going to get a big meal. They always start you out with something that's really appetizing, not too big, but sort of warms you up for what's going to come. And so the Mahler is a journey, which we'll talk about later. But what we wanted was something light, immediately accessible, something catchy, from the same time period, but maybe from a different country, that would warm the audience up, something that wasn't too high stakes, that they would immediately like and identify with. And then I think what will happen is that it will just sort of set up the Mahler to even be more powerful than it already is. So what we chose were two vignettes from Samuel Coleridge Taylor's Petite Suite, the first and the last movement. They are about 2.5 minutes each. They follow a form that everybody will immediately understand, and the melodies are immediately likable on first listen. So there are two things that sort of come out of the English. He's an English composer. There are two sort of late 19th century branches. There is the Elgar route, which he's often credited with sort of defining the English sound. But there's the Rodgers and Hammerstein route, which are catchy melodies, not a lot of development, but they're writing for people to be entertained, and it's exactly what this Coleridge Taylor does. It's a perfect start for the concert.
And Taylor is somebody who was actually quite well known in his day and was very popular. Was black, interestingly, this black English composer who was quite successful and who was kind of largely forgotten about in a century or so after his death. And his music is beginning to make a kind of recirculation in the orchestra world, and it's an exciting and fun thing to see.
Yeah. Actually, the son of a former slave, and who was freed by the British soldiers in the Revolutionary War. And then immigrated back to London. And so, England was known as the land without music by virtually everybody, from the death of Purcell, which was late 17th century, for basically 200 years. And Elgar sort of steals the spotlight with his late Renaissance, if you will. But Coleridge Taylor was wildly popular, and sort of packed the concert hall, and was frankly more popular than Elgar was during the time. So we sort of forget about some of these composers, but yes, in the past couple of years, he's had a renaissance, if you will.
Yeah, and Mahler was a composer who, in the years after his death, was almost forgotten about for a few decades, and then his music was recirculated again in the middle part of the 20th century, and has since become a complete staple of the orchestra repertoire. And you talked a few minutes ago about composers essentially asking the same question throughout their compositional lives, but just answering it in different ways. And here with Mahler's first symphony, we have the beginning of his career, where he is beginning to ask the same questions that he'll reapproach through a remaining 8.5 or so symphonies. So talk about what those questions were that we first encounter in the first symphony.
Sure. So Mahler takes us, if you look at his entire lifetime, he is prefixed with death. And this is something that he lived with on a constant basis. He lost several children. I'm pretty sure he lost a few siblings. He was sort of fascinated and obsessed with his own death. But at this period of time, early, which is the 1870s-ish, he was more looking at the things through the lens of a child. And so there is sort of this idea of death, but also from a child's point of view. And reading more about him and looking more into his music, I'm beginning more convinced that he must have experienced some type of child trauma, and sort of from those experiences, it is not uncommon for people to create their own universe in which they are safe and they can explore these questions. And I do think that there's something like that happening in this piece. And so he sort of asked the question of what is life? Which is sort of a big question to ask, right? But the answer that he comes to with this one is the experience of spring sort of bursting forth, if you will. And it's very nature-based, if you will. We start at the beginning of the work, sort of on the last night of winter, just before spring. And you can imagine Mahler as a child sort of walking through the forest, seeing the moonlight, beginning to hear the squirrels start to play and the birds start to come out, and sort of the sun just beginning to warm up. And you can sort of hear him sort of experiencing these things and noticing them. There is, throughout the first movement, there is a dialogue between the cellos and the flute. And they seem to be a pair, and I think that Mahler is sort of personified in the cello, and the flute is sort of his companion that sort of provides commentary of, well, come this way, or don't go that way, or, everything is great right now, which is sort of a wonderful way to start the piece, right? And he gets into, in the middle of the first movement, we have our first glimpse of death, or sort of at least struggle, right? Sort of out of nowhere in this movement where it's all about flowers and birds and springtime, the clouds start to corner us a little bit. But then he sort of breaks through and doesn't take that route. And we wrap up the first movement in a sort of flourish of high summer, if you will. Second movement, another sort of question about what is life, and this one he answers through dance. So he spent a lot of time in taverns growing up. I think his parents owned one, and so he is familiar with the music. And so the second movement is a rustic dance that undoubtedly has to be a drinking song in ways. The middle of that movement, he sort of transitions, sort of closes the door on the party, goes to a back room, maybe has a little bit of a courting dance, and then the big dance comes back. But the third movement's the one that is sort of really throws us for a loop. The third movement was inspired from a wood carving called The Huntsman's Funeral. This one, in this wood carving, it depicts forest animals processing in a funeral march, carrying the body of a hunter. And so it's purposefully ironic and a little dark. And you can think of Mahler sort of looking at this and sort of chuckling to himself and being maybe fascinated with it as a child. And so he sort of says, well, how am I going to talk about death? And sort of mocking death in a way, right? And it's sort of an interesting way of looking at it. So what he does is he takes Frere Jacques, but sets it in the minor mode, and he gives it to instruments that aren't necessarily solo instruments.
Right. In the minor mode, there are essentially two scales that classical music is largely composed of. You've got the major scale, which is, we know from a doe, a deer, a female deer, but then the minor scale takes a couple of those notes and lowers them. Right. And so Frere Jacques becomes, in this movement, it sounds like...
Yeah, he has the bass. Right. Which is sort of almost kind of like a pedantic... He's poking fun at it. The whole thing is sort of you can't mess with me, death kind of thing, or maybe we're so sad that the hunter died, right? Or it's so bad for us that the hunter died, but they're sort of putting on this ruse.
Right.
And so he has the bass, the first bass player play a solo, this first theme, just by himself, and then has the bassoon, and then a group of cellists, and then the tuba play this. And it goes in a round, and you just sort of you can hear all of the forest animals walk by doing their version of, oh, it's so sad that the hunter died. It's so sad, right? And they put on this joke for the first part of the movement. But then he doubles down on the joke, and sort of all of a sudden behind the funeral procession, there's a second part of the procession in which a klezmer band is coming by. And you can just think of how like dark that would be if you were witnessing the funeral march and then a klezmer band were playing. Yeah, right. It would be surreal to experience. Then the third part is sort of a folk song. But the real cool thing about this, and this is for music theory nerds, is the original Feuerjoch comes back, but it's one step higher. And I have always asked myself, for the past 10 years of studying this piece, why in the world are we now all of a sudden from D minor into E flat minor? It didn't make any sense when I first picked up the piece, but then I realized I think he's actually creating a Doppler effect, where it just sort of, now the procession is closer to him, it's higher, and then it goes away and it sort of slides down to D minor with not really a smooth harmonic transition. It just sort of like creeps its way down, not unlike an ambulance driving away from you, which sort of laces down, right? And then it ends. So the round just sort of peters out. And the last thing you hear is the last drum beat of the procession sort of in the distance. I think the feeling that you get is sort of like, what have I just witnessed, right? But you can hear Mahler sort of laughing in the background of, don't you get it, it's supposed to be funny. But not ha-ha funny, but humorous in a way. But while you're sort of sitting there in the silence of contemplating what just happened in that third movement, it's interrupted with a storm, basically. And so the last movement is a journey unto itself. We experience 6 minutes of sort of tragic struggle in F minor, which is kind of a strange key to do all of this in, but it is just bombast, right? It's movie music for sure, right? It is the first fight of the superheroes against the villain, just epic struggle. Then we get into a D flat love theme, which is sort of the perfect key for all these things. He's kind of Baroque in that way, in that he picks his keys for affectation.
Right.
The struggle comes back. Then we get the inverse of F minor. We get F major, which is sort of pastoral peace, if you will. And then what you would expect is something in C major and then maybe a turn to F major to wrap up the piece. But D major just sort of comes storming back. And the way he sets it up is that he gets us to C major like we expect, but then immediately just sort of interrupts it and repeats the same thing in D major. And it goes from, C major is a very human key, D major all of a sudden now sounds triumphant and victorious. So the superheroes have won, and we get a good 5 minutes of basically just D major to the end of the symphony. And it keeps on getting more and more and more exciting. And it's one of the best endings of a symphony in the entire repertoire. In fact, it's so meaningful to him that life wins out over death in this one, not so much in later symphonies, that he has all 7 horns stand up to play the final theme. For whatever reason, it seemed important to him for them to stand to play this last which is kind of inexplicable. He didn't explain why. It's just horns should stand at this part. And so we'll have all 7 of them stand up at the back of the orchestra.
And it's a piece that musicians love to play. I mean, I can tell everybody, the orchestra is really primed to play this. They're really excited. I'm really excited to hear it. So, John, thank you so much for coming and talking with us today. I'm looking forward to this concert. Everybody, we will see you next Saturday, and I'll look forward to saying hi at that point. And I'm sure you will love watching John conduct this orchestra. Thanks a lot, John.
Thank you.